This is the first part of possibly a 5-part podcast that my producer, Steve Brienza, and myself will be doing. And the series is called Billy and Me, Billy being Billy Friedkin. So in 1963, I was an undercover officer in narcotics. I had a white shield. I was not yet a detective. And my job was to go out in the city of New York and buy narcotics in the street. I was a street narcotic undercover cop. Given my looks and given the time, I was quite good at it because most of the police department at that time honestly did not look like I looked. Um, you know, so it was quite easy for me to sort of be not a cop, if you know what I mean. Not even to be suspected as a cop. So I had been doing this for about a year, possibly 14 months. In the meantime, I was in what they called a narcotic unit, and I was in the other undercover unit. Now, the other police officers, we didn't call ourselves police officers then, the other cops, they were working on a much, much larger operations regarding narcotics. Where it was coming from, the bulk of where it was, what the street value of it was. That was really, really above what I was doing. However, those people that were doing that primarily was Sonny Grasso and Eddie Egan. And of course, if I mention their name, it's synonymous with the motion picture, The French Connection. So I will tell you now how that started. Once again, I was making a buy. It was a rather warm day in November in Alphabet City. That's the lower part of Manhattan. And I went and I made my buy, and it was $75, and I got a half load. Half the time, I didn't know if I was buying poison, if I was buying talcum powder. I mean, but that was the deal. So when I purchased, I started down the stairs, and I looked, and I could look down the stairs like a well down the stairs, and I saw hands and sneakers coming up the stairs, taking the stairs two at a time. I knew I was in trouble. So I turned around and I went upstairs and I got out onto the roof. Now I have a backup, and don't forget, there's no cell phones, there's no radios. I have no way of contacting the backup, and they are somewhere out in the street.
And these people, Randy, these people are just working with the drug dealers. They're going to come probably rip you off. Is that what's happening?
Well, you know, my stomach told me they weren't coming up and say happy birthday. I mean, so I knew I was in trouble. So I got up over and onto the roof, and I beat it across a couple of roofs, and I made it on the fire escape, and I went down on the fire escape. I saw them come up on the roof, but when I went down on the fire escape, the way I was going down, I assumed they knew where I was going to come out, and that they would come back downstairs and run out to wherever I was going to come out on the street. So I got down there through the alleyways, and I made my way out onto the side street, and then I walked to the main avenue, which was Delancey Street. And Delancey Street, you know, the foot of Delancey Street, and the bridge. The bridge begins to go to Queens or to Brooklyn, wherever the Delancey Street Bridge goes. So I came out, and once again, you know, everything seemed to be moving in slow motion. Any cop, back then, honestly, I'll tell you, when something wasn't right, the first thing for me and many, many other cops undercover, your stomach sort of told you something is not right here. Something, and the word that we use is something was not correct. And so I got out onto the street and I saw people huddled in front of Ratner's store. That was a pretty famous store, bagels, etc. This was a pretty heavy, dominant Jewish neighborhood, and they were standing and they were looking into the store. I saw it in other stores, and what those stores had then was a black and white TV that would play out onto the street from inside the store. That would play out, and they were looking at it. So I made my way across the Lancey Street and I went into the 7th Precinct. And the 7th Precinct is located 500 feet off of the Lancey Street on some side street. I can't remember the name right now. And I went in there and there was a sergeant on the desk. Now, once again, I had rather long hair. My hair was in a rubber band. My beard had grown out somewhat. I was disheveled. I really, really looked like a drug user rather than a cop. So now once I get in there, we have to do what we call the dance. And I have to convince the sergeant that I am an undercover cop. And the only way to do that is to know certain, let's say, numbers or papers that are associated with the job. For instance, one of the things that I would say to him, a UF-28. A UF-28 is a form you fill out if you want a day off. A UF-61. A 61 is somebody that's in there to report a crime. So after I did a couple of those, and he always looked at me with that face of, I can't explain it, but he just looked at me, you're not a cop. I mean, you don't represent the job looking like that, because the job at that time, you couldn't have a beard, you couldn't have tattoos, you had to have the proper uniform, summer or winter, and you were told when to wear that. Absolutely. Your hair had to be below your, not below your ears. So I look like nothing but a drug addict or user rather than a cop. So once we got by all of that, and now I have the drugs, and this is continuity, the drugs have to go from me into a safe that they have there. And the next time that I come back, I take those drugs after identifying myself, and I bring the drugs down to be tested. So that was the process. It's a little more than that, but that's really not part of the story. So after I did all that with the drugs, and I said, Sarge, just like this, I said, Sarge, what's going on? I don't speak like this, but this is exactly what he said to me. He said, I don't know where the fuck you have been, but they just shot and killed the President of the United States. And of course, that was President Kennedy. My world, no matter how small it was, no matter how large it was, it stopped. It just stopped. I truly think everything that was happening, whether it was work or playground or going to school, I think that everything I got the feeling everything stopped. It just stopped there. So what I did was I made my way back to the office, back to the narcotic office, which was downtown. That office today is the museum. It is the New York City Police Department Museum. But I went down there, and there were grown men who fought who fought in the Second World War, who fought in Korea or whatever it was. I mean, men who had seen everything on the job or whatever it was. And I'm telling you, they were either smoking or crying. And I felt like crying. So I went in there and nothing. To this day, I don't know what happened to that arrest. I never went back to pick up the narcotics. I didn't do anything. And 2 weeks later, I got a call to go to the Manhattan District Attorney's office, which I did. And while I was in the Manhattan District Attorney's office, and this will be a short version because there will be a podcast on this later on down the line, I was told that I was going undercover, again, into Greenwich Village. I was being furnished with an apartment, and I would be undercover in Greenwich Village as homosexuals or gay people at that time were being ripped off, assaulted for money, and eventually wound up killing of them what was happening. And that was 1963, possibly now 1964. I'm going to let that rest right there, as I say, and out of that came a motion picture called Cruising, starring Al Pacino, who is portraying me in the movie. But there will be a separate podcast on that. Now, to get back to what happened on the day, or what was going on the day that President Kennedy was shot. Sonny Grasso, Eddie Egan, and a number of other, and they were detectives. I was still a cop. They were detectives, and they were working on much larger cases. And it took time to develop these cases, and patience, and the work that was put into to making these cases. So finally, in 1964, maybe 1965, they made an arrest. And the arrest was made, several people were involved. Several, let's put it this way, bad guys, people who were dealing in drugs. Not on the level of where I was buying $75 half loads. These people were dealing in keys. And a key at that time, I may be wrong, but I may be off, but a key was worth about $32,000 in 1964 or 1965. This is 2023, so I'll let you do the math of what it would be worth today. And they made this bust, and it got into the paper, and this was a huge bust. There have been bigger busts, quantity-wise, since then, but never quality. I mean, this was up in the 90s. That's how strong how it was. It was virtually almost perfect heroin. And that could be stepped on 6, 7, and 8 times. So a $32,000 key, and you step on it, as they say, 7 times, I mean, big business, big business. So they made that bust. And it became known at the time, I might mispronounce his name, as the Patsy Fuker case. It was known as the Patsy Fuker case. So remember that name. I will go back into it again. Well, that got into the papers. It got all over the papers. And a writer by the name of Robin Moore, who had written a book called The Green Berets, he got wind of this, and he came into narcotics with permission to write about narcotics. Well, after speaking especially to Eddie Egan, it became the Eddie Egan and Sonny Grasso story, and rightfully so. And he wrote the book, and he titled the book The French Connection. The reason it's called The French Connection is at that time, most of the drugs, if not all of the drugs, were coming in from Marseille in France. I don't know the route, I don't know how, but it was coming, and it was coming into New York City. And so, what Sonny and Eddie did in making that arrest, that arrest was the end of the journey from Marseille with the drugs, however it came, and it wound up in Patsy Fuca's house out in Brooklyn, and they seized it. So that's how the book was called The French Connection. Well, the book wasn't out there that long when Hollywood, specifically 20th Century, came knocking to make a motion picture. Now, when it was being written as a script, it was turned down. The French Connection was turned down 4 times, actually 3, because one studio turned it down twice. I don't have to mention who the studios were. That's accurate. It was turned down. 20th Century had made a motion picture called Cleopatra. Cleopatra, it cost a hell of a lot to make the movie. And it wound up being part of causing 20th Century to go bankrupt or go out of business. And when 20th Century was left with X amount of dollars, I don't know all of the details, X amount of dollars, 20th Century called Phil D'Antoni and to come to 20th Century. Now, it's my understanding, and I will get into who these people are, it's my understanding that they had been there once before, but they weren't in front of 2 people called Zanuck and Brown from 20th Century. This time, he was going to go and sit with Zanuck and Brown. It was Phil D'Antoni who said, I am bringing out Sonny Grasso, Eddie Egan, and Randy Jurgensen, and I'm going to let them sit in the room with Zanuck and Brown and let them tell the story rather than he go in and tell the story. Now, they went in there. I did not go in there. They went in there, and literally within 20 minutes, they came out, and I'll never forget it. Phil has a habit of saying this to me over the years. When you play stickball in New York City, you play from sewer to sewer. And if you hit the ball over 2 sewers, it's a home run. Phil D'Antoni came out from the office of Zanuck and Brown and said to me, and this is not going to be the last time he said it, Randy, we hit 2 sewers. So we had it. Now, I've come to find out that it was $2 million. They gave them $2 million to make the French Connection. So now, I want to stop right there and tell you how I got involved in the French Connection. I was in 1971, in 1971, I was a second grade homicide detective working in the 6th Division, which at the time is Harlem. It's Harlem. It consists of 3 precincts: the 3-2, the 2-5, and the 2-8. The 2-8 being the smallest of all of them. So in 1971, in New York City, they began to shoot police officers, set them up and shoot these police officers. We were entering into an era of 1971 where we would go for a decade, if not 2 decades, of where 2,000 people a year in the city of New York were being killed. And 500 of those victims, those people who were being murdered in the 6th Division where I worked, and that's almost a quarter of all of the 2,000, which is broken up into 77 different precincts. And in the 6th Division, again, is the 2-5, the 3-2, and the 2-8, which is the smallest. So we had 500 of those homicides every year for the next 15 years. So I was a homicide detective working in the smallest precinct that was getting the most homicides out of the 3 precincts that I was working in. So I was working in the 2-8 when the telephone rang, and it was Sonny Grasso. And Sonny Grasso said to me, "Come on over to the east side." The 23rd, the 28th precinct was located 1 block south of 125th Street. I could see the Apollo Theater. All of it was there. I mean, you had people there. Famous people at the time. They were in Jackie Robinson. I'll think of some of the other names. The boxer pound for pound, Sugar Ray Robinson. They were all there, and it was called Sugar Hill. And so I get this phone call, and I go over, and I meet through Sonny Grasso. I meet Phil D'Antoni. Now, Phil D'Antoni at this point is the producer of a picture called Bullet, starring Steve McQueen. If nobody doesn't remember anything about that picture, they remember Steve McQueen in the car and that chase. The growling of that engine with Steve McQueen in that chase. He's the producer of that. Billy Friedkin is probably 31 years of age at this particular time, and he is known for a couple of a doc and another one, another motion picture. The motion picture is The Boys in the Band, Cliff Gorman, a host of good actors in there. He also did a doc on a man who was on death row and was certainly going to be killed, and his last name was Crump. I can't think of anything else. And because of the doc, the man was not killed. And that's another story at another time that I will go into.
It's called The People vs. Paul Crump, a TV movie from 1962.
Say it again?
The People versus Paul Crump.
The People versus Paul Crump from 1962. Now remember, this is 1971. And that's about all the credentials that Billy Friedkin has. Of course, Phil D'Antoni, the producer of Bullet, is the heavyweight in there. Now comes what I'm supposed to do. And this takes time. What's expected of me while I am working what's expected of me is to turn the two characters who are going to play Sonny and Eddie, I am to turn them into narcotic detectives. Okay? At the time, the first person to portray Eddie Egan was Jimmy Breslin. Jimmy Breslin from the Daily News. I worked with him. Like I worked with him on Tuesday. Wednesday, he was gone. Thursday, I heard it was going to be Robert Mitchum, who I never met. On Friday, Robert Mitchum was gone. Monday came Gene Hackman. And that's the casting that I know regarding who was to play Eddie Egan. Roy Scheider was always there. I don't know of Roy Scheider's past credentials before the French Connection, but the heavyweight, or the one that was really known in there, was Tony Lobianco. And Tony Lobianco is going to play, remember that name I told you, Patsy Fuca? Tony Lobianco is going to play Patsy Fuca in the movie. So he had done a movie called The Honeymoon Killers. And Tony Lobianco is one handsome son of a bitch. All of the women loved Tony Lobianco. They all saw that picture. So he was the prominent star, if you will, going into the French Connection. So my job now, again, was to turn Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider into narcotic detectives. Little did I know that it would be Billy Friedkin who would truly be the narcotic detective. I did not do one single thing with those guys that Billy Friedkin wasn't there. So after teaching them what to look for in the street, how I made arrests. Remember, I never made arrests, and they would not in the movie either. I never made arrests where I took and locked up somebody with a key of narcotics. I didn't, and if I did, I stumbled upon it. So I just taught them how to be street narcotic detectives. And one of the things that I did it while I was working. We had a bar, and it had a double door entrance. The bar was on the corner. One entrance was on the side street, and the other entrance, this is important, and the other entrance was on the avenue. And so after I made my arrest for an assault, after I made my arrest for a homicide, the police department, its answer to whatever is going on is numbers. Give them numbers that they can answer their critics or who's ever looking at them, give them numbers. One of the answers to the narcotic problem was, how many people did you lock up for it? You're on top of it. This is what we're doing. So rather than go to court with just the assault case that I had, the homicide case, or the robbery case, whatever, the rape case, whatever I had, I would say to my partner, and he knew it right away, let's go down and let's take the bar out. We know what's in there. We know what's in there. So I would then get a what they call the paddy wagon, the prisoner wagon, where you take the prisoners down to court. It was a green big box, and I would have it back up on the sidewalk right alongside of the door on the side street. And then I would go in through the main door, and I would shout at the top of my lungs, Jurgensen's here, Detective Jurgensen's here.
All right, Popeye's here.
As loud as I could, but most likely, more than once, at 10 times, because I did this for years, I would go in and pull the plug out of the jukebox. Now, maybe once or twice, statute of limitations has run out, once or twice that I went in there and the situation didn't look good, Yes, I pulled my gun out and I fired it into the ceiling, and some plaster fell down. And in the meantime, everybody would then throw whatever they had in their pockets on the floor. Very rarely I got a gun. Maybe the bartender had a gun. Very rarely I got a gun. What I did get at that time, and what they did call at that time, was Saturday night specials. I didn't know if those guns were going to blow up in your hand, if they were going to go off. So,
Can you explain what is it? Just
a Saturday night special is almost a handmade gun, if you will.
okay.
Somebody makes a gun out of wood and a pipe, and you know, and hopefully it'll
A
fire.
ghost gun.
And it
Now
was
they-
called a Saturday
Okay.
night special. So I went in. Now the people would also start to run out the other door, and virtually what they were doing, of course I had cops there, they were just running right into the wagon. And when the wagon was full, they stopped them from running in there, right? Now, I did this. I chose to do this. I would go out to the wagon, first of all, and if there were any women in there, I would take the women off and bring them back into the bar. Now, here was my thinking of that. Yes, I am a good guy, and I did make these decisions. I felt that these women, someplace, had kids. And if I was going to take them off the street and they were wanted or whatever it was, I mean, these kids were going to be without a mother or without a grandma, whatever it was. So I didn't take the women. I did not take the women. And so I went into the bar. We actually, I had one of them, as I stood watch, go and get a broom, and he would take the broom and he would sweep up all of the drugs, needles, every single thing that there was there, all the bags and everything. And once it was all in a pile,
And just for a visual, this is like a decent pile of stuff here.
yeah,
Like
yes it is. It's
almost everyone in there had something in their pockets for the
Yep.
most part.
Yeah. If they didn't have something in there, they had a needle. If they didn't have something in there, they were looking to score. So that means that they had, because nothing was done on consignment. So they had to have money. You know, I didn't find the money in there. I did not find any money down there. But yes. So, and sometimes I found, today we call it weed. Back then we called it pot. Sometimes I found that. And if I never went to court with less than 10. 12, 15, maybe I did. It's a lot of work. Yeah, but yeah, a lot of fingerprinting, a lot of stuff like that. And what belched up out of that? Well, what came out of that was that a lot of these poor souls, almost like Walking Dead, they were wanted. They were wanted in other crimes. Detectives and everybody were looking for them as witnesses, or maybe even a perpetrator. You love that word, perpetrator, in other crimes. So that I would get. Also, probably the single most important thing. And by the way, they were all charged with this. If there was one gun there, they were all charged. Nobody was going to be found guilty of that. You know, did you see him perpetrate? Did you ever take your eyes off when he dropped the gun? Did you pick it up and give it? No, nobody ever got convicted of that. None whatsoever. But what came out of that was and there was always somebody wanted. I remember once, this happened once, only once. I want to emphasize that again to the camera. Only once this happened, that I took that out in, say, 14 or 15 months, and 2 people came back and had no record. I didn't believe it. I did not believe it. It doesn't mean that where I worked that everybody was a criminal. Anywhere where there was heavy drug use, you would find that. If I made that arrest in Alphabet City, you'd find the same thing. You might find 1 or 2 guys that weren't. But if you're in that world, if you're dealing and wanting and committing crime to satisfy your habit and stuff like that, it's inevitable you're going to wind up with some kind of a record. So what that did, again, to get off from this, what that did was it maybe satisfied some detectives or cops or somebody. In fact, there were a couple in there where the FBI were looking for these guys. were looking for these guys. I don't know what the crime was. They were looking for them. So that satisfied a reason for doing that. But the biggest reason for doing that is that my lieutenant could say to his captain, who could say to the inspector, who could say to the police commissioner's office, guess what? 15 more people were arrested for using narcotics. So what is the city saying that we're not doing anything about the narcotic problem? Get it?
The numbers.
Numbers, very important. So that was part of my job. Also, part of my job, which was a great part of my job, I showed them how to get an informant. And how do you get an informant? I showed them, and I like to believe that I was the only one doing this because I never told anybody. So I would get somebody through happenstance or whatever, and they had narcotics. I might be walking down the street or whatever it was, and they dumped it, and I seen it, and I went over there, and it's what I call nonsense narcotics. It's not worth anything except to the guy, and he's going to use it. He's not selling it. He's sick. He's bad off, and stuff like that. So I would take him, and I would take the narcotics, and I would get to know him up and down, inside and out. I'd know his street name. I would know exactly everything. And I would say to him, and at the time it was a dime, and I did this, and I took a dime out of my pocket, and I said, if you think that I need to know something, here's a dime. Use that dime. You know where I am. Yes, sir. Oh, yes. They weren't getting arrested. And somehow or the other, when I left, whatever the narcotics I had in my pocket that I took from them, I couldn't find it when I got to the station house. I don't know what happened to it, and don't ask me, because I don't know what happened to it. And I'll never forget it. Roy Scheider's mouth said, and I said, don't say anything. And of course, the guy did not know who Roy, and he thought that they were other detectives and stuff like that. But I did that in real time. I didn't do that and then tell them that I did it. They witnessed it. So it was an education.
Would you feel these people up and size them up over the course of a couple of days, or just at that one meeting
One meeting said it all.
And you sized them up
look, let's put it this way. If I walked up to you and I showed you the gold shield and said I was a New York City detective, that's it. You don't need any more meetings. You're not going to say nothing. You know.
And even this being a junkie, essentially, you still trusted, so to speak, your instinct on whether or not you should be involved with this person as an informant.
No. Did I trust them? Let me tell you something. The only person, when I went into a den, when I went into to buy narcotics, the only person I trusted was me.
Yeah.
I trusted me. That's it. But, and let me tell you something. It did pay off. It absolutely paid off. I mean, it was a guy, and he was working for a big company, and he was, as they call it, chipping. Every now and then he would do, he was not, and blah, blah, blah. And he had a wife, he had 2 kids, and so forth and so on. And he gave me 3, over the course of 6 months, 3 good gun collars. And I made those collars, took that gun off the street. I don't know, through him, how many lives he saved by me getting those guns off the street. That's the way I worked, and a lot of people knew that's the way that worked. Most importantly, also, is that everybody, they went by a street name. If the guy's name was John Smith, if that was the farthest thing away, his name is, too far. His name's too. No, his name. they all had street names. They all had street names. So even in all the forms that we had after we took the fingerprints and stuff like that, I started a file. And where I could, I put a palm print because I already had it. And I started this in the 60s. And John Smith, he also knows.
I'm sorry, man. Before that time, there really wasn't like a folder of common people in the neighborhood and their street names. You just started one?
Yeah, I did. No, but did we know who they were? Well, we had them fingerprinted. We had their address, their telephone number, blah blah blah. So, but I started this, and all it said was the name and the address. I didn't know if the address was true. Most times it was because it came back on their fingerprints. So, last known address is what it was called, and I put that down, and then I put down AKA, also known as. And so I remember one, and his name was B on 16th Street. B on 16th Street. Now, what that meant to me was it's 116th Street. It's 116th Street. He'd be on 16th Street. Well, what's his name? You know, the guy's coming in and giving me a piece of information. Yeah, I'm looking for. They all knew each other by those names. They didn't know each other. I know that this doesn't belong here. I married into an Italian family. She had, I'd say, 8, 9 uncles. They were all named Frank and John and Michael. I knew them as Shabu, Bippy. One guy's name was Bappy. I can't think of the other guy. And one day she came to me and she said, Frank died. And I said, who's Frank? She said, Shabu. Okay. So what I did, I took that and I applied that right here. Now that file grew and grew and grew. I had detectives from outside precincts call up and say, we're looking for a guy, and this is, I went in there, and I would say 9 times out of 10, I had it. I had it, right? I had it right in there. They were so grateful, happy, but it made life easier, And one day, the borough, the detectives in the borough, which is, here I am in the precinct, then there's the division, then there's the borough. They came and they wanted to take, and I said, they were I said, no, you're not doing that. Well, we're going to make a copy. I said, no, I'm not giving it up. And I mean, they sort of like dug in, and it was like, these guys are from the borough. They represent an inspector. And I'm saying no. So I went to my boss, and he said, no, Randy, you don't have to give it up. Don't do it. I'll take care of it. And he did. So they saw all of this, and Billy saw all of this. Now, there was at least 1 or 2 incidents where, am I going to say it got out of hand? We would go through the door. Now, I had a team, and I would never, ever, ever, once again, allow any of my team member to go through the door first. You didn't know what was on the other side. And what was on the other side was a desperate, crazed drug addict that if you were going to take his drugs from him, you don't know what was going to happen. And so, no, I always went through the door first. So, who followed me? Roy, Gene? No. Who followed me was Billy Friedkin. Billy Friedkin was in front of them. So one day we go through the door, and bang, down goes the door, and they're all running towards the windows and stuff like that. I got cops in the yard, and it's not as complicated as you think, and they're throwing the drugs out the window. But the last thing that they do, and people have to understand this, they'd much rather get caught with the drugs rather than throw the drugs out the window. They're like virtually throwing their life away once they throw the drugs out the window. There's no chance. So I turned around, and there was Billy Friedkin with a gun. And Eddie Egan gave him the gun. Yeah, it was fun. It was this, it was that, it was so forth and so on. In the real world, that they were still being arrested. They weren't being arrested for the movie. They were being arrested because I was doing my job. Only once Billy Friedkin came with me on a homicide. And I'm not going to go into it, but it was a homicide of where a father, a daughter, and a granddaughter were killed, and it was over drugs. And he was with me from the very, very beginning till the case broke and the fingerprinting and all. And he wanted to do, not on that case, he wanted to do some of the fingerprinting that we did in the precinct on these arrests. So when he had the gun, I didn't go to Billy. I went to Eddie, and I did use language and Eddie Egan. Hey, look, were Eddie Egan and I tight? I was Eddie Egan's best man at his marriage. Eddie Egan and I, he didn't get along with. He got along with me fine. Every New Year's, we would go to some bar and sing "Sweet Caroline" or whatever the hell it was. I loved Eddie, and I got along fine with Eddie. But on that, I said, that's never going to happen again. I said, I'm going to stop right now. I said, I will stop right now. It's not going to be done. So all of the things that I have described of what I did, you will see the next time that you look at the French Connection, you'll see how they got the guy in the bar, and they separated him from the bar, and they got him, and he was the guy that had all the news and stuff like that, right? That you will see in the bar scene when he goes in and he says, Popeye is here. That's where it all came from. It all came from the work that we were doing to make the picture. Definitely to make the picture.
So, Randy, I know the way you work. Probably know the answer. Does any of the higher-ups know that you're taking these guys, Roy, Billy, and Gene, along with you on real work?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No, nobody did. But by the same token, before Billy and Gene and them, and this wasn't announced in the newspaper, and this was like a really clandestine operation.
Yeah.
They were waiting someplace, so forth and so on. Come on. I'm going to go and do this, okay? And they would almost virtually meet me at the scene.
They just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
And it was always safety first and stuff like that. So you would see, you have seen these scenes appear in the movie. Now we're going to make the movie. We're off to make the movie. So here's one of the things that's going to happen in this movie. Billy wants every location that it took place. I learned, and I did 5-6 pictures with Billy. I learned before Billy put it on REEL, it almost had to have some kind of a coat or a jacket that he could put on that it was REAL. And so we went to every location there ever was, right? So guess what? We wind up on the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, did anything happen on the Brooklyn Bridge? Yes, it did. When there was not a chase, but a surveillance to follow cars, it happened on the Brooklyn Bridge. So, Sunday, by now, Billy Friedkin is saying to me, Randy, you see that bridge there? We're going to shoot that bridge here, but this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and so forth and so on. And Billy would virtually walk away. And now I was left to make that happen. So now we have we have the cars with the bad guys in it, and they're coming from Brooklyn into Manhattan. We have the car with the good guys in it that are following them, right? Then we have at the other end, we have the car with the bad guys in it blocked. We have to have it blocked. And now the car with the good guys, they come along and the traffic has blocked them and they can't see the car with the bad guys in it that's blocked. You don't really have to understand it. So it's Sunday. I'm in civilian clothes. I get to the foot, or if you want to call it the entrance, of the Brooklyn Bridge on the Brooklyn side. I stand in the middle. I take out my gold shield and I hold it up like this, and all of the traffic stops. I then put the car with the bad guys in it. Notify them, notify the camera crews, or notify Billy, however it was, we're ready. Roll them. Action. Go, Randy. I let the cars through. 10, 15 cars. I let them go through. Then I stand out there like this, and I hold up the traffic. And now the traffic catches up to the bad guys who's really going slow, and then he falls in with the traffic. The camera is on the bad guys. Then I wait, I count to 10 or whatever it was, and I get the good guys, and I now let the traffic go. And there's a big space, I let maybe 10 or 15 cars go with the good guys, and I stop the traffic. And once they get going, and they're going, and now the camera is on the good guys. Now I let all the traffic go. Now the traffic is blocked up on the Brooklyn Bridge on this side. The guys in the car get out on the Brooklyn Bridge and say, we've lost them, the traffic, we're stuck in traffic. The guys that have blocked the bridge have now said from their car, which is now going along with the traffic, along with the bad guy, we got him. And that's how that scene was done. And it was done once, and it was done on a Sunday. Later, Billy Friedkin would say to me, Randy, you gave me the biggest, maybe some of you are not old enough to know what an erector set is, but he said, Randy, you've given me the biggest erector set I've ever had to work. That's how the Brooklyn Bridge was done. Now, I'm not getting into the chase. I gotta have a sip of coffee here.
Yeah, and take your time now. Chase, you've covered a lot over the years, but definitely him crashing.
No. So,
Good.
We're working on the set. Sometimes I would work all night, and I would show up on the set, and I would do a day. And you know, when you're filming at that time of the year, you only have light maybe 6 hours a day. So I would work 6 hours or whatever it was. Now, it really wasn't necessary for me to be there for any of the interior shots whenever they're arguing in the office and stuff like that. I never missed, and this is important, I never missed a day's work. And I never lacked or slowed down on my day's work when I was doing real police work. I never did. So one day, I'm on the set and we're outside.
And at the time, you're going after Black Liberation Army members, no?
Yes.
During all this time, so
Yes,
you're not
I
just
am.
doing
I'm going.
low-key
I am.
police work.
I am. I'm chasing cop killers. I remember one day, and this could be another story for another time. But I remember one day, and I distinctly remember it. It was a Monday, And Nick Cirillo, which I will go into much later. You don't even have to remember these names now. Nick Cirillo, who was in charge of the Manhattan DA's office, who was literally in charge of the cop killings. He had those cases. He came to me one day on a Monday and he said, tomorrow, Tuesday, LaGuardia Airport, we're flying to St. Louis. We're going to St. Louis. Okay. I met him. We flew to St. Louis. It was the bank shootout. Two of the Black Liberation Army were killed. The cops were there. And we received, I didn't want to go into this, but we received one of the guns of the cops that was killed in New York. Like I say, I will go into great detail at another time. But that's what I was doing while making the French Connection movie. Okay? So, we're working on the set. So there's a scene that's going to take place, and in the picture, if you've seen the picture, it's the end, it's virtually the end of the chase. This has nothing to do with the chase. It's the end of the chase. And Gene Hackman gets out of his car, and he goes to the entrance, the subway steps to the subway. And Gene Hackman is there with his gun. The Frenchman who's been on the subway that has crashed and he's lost his gun, he's staggering out and he's at the top of the stairs. And at the top of the stairs, he shoots this Frenchman. Now, this is a rehearsal. I've set the scene up for you. So I see it in the rehearsal, and I see the stuntman, Alex Stevens, East Coast Stuntmen's, which I'm a lifetime member of the East Coast Stuntmen's Association. I see Alex Stevens tumble down all the stairs at the foot of Gene. And that is the conclusion of probably the wildest chase ever put on film, which we'll go into. So I go over to Billy Friedkin and I said to him, boy, did I learn a lesson. I go over to Billy Friedkin and I don't know how I did this. I said, are you going to film this way? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, of course. And I said, but Billy, Eddie Egan, Gene Hackman, who's playing Eddie Egan, I said, he's shooting this guy in the back. He's shooting the guy in the back. And I said, and he said, no. He said, this will work. And I said, Billy, I mean, Eddie is my partner. This can't happen, It shouldn't happen this way. I mean, he doesn't even have a gun. And Billy Friedkin looked at me, and I remember, I'll never forget it. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, Randy, I'm the fucking director. He says, I'm directing this movie. And I said, yes, you are. He says, it'll work. So I went back. I want to fast forward now. So I'm in a theater, and they're having a screening, and I'll never forget it, of the French Connection, and there are 1,200 people in this theater. Some are even standing where I'm standing in the back. And there are dignitaries there. I don't know who's there. So I'm standing in the back, and I watch it, and now here comes that scene. And of course, there's Gene, and he shoots this unarmed Frenchman man in the back with his hands up. And there is that moment of silence, just that moment of silence. And then the roar that goes up from 1,200 people. I am telling you, the roar was unbelievable. And Billy comes running up the aisle and he says to me, you see? He says, it works for them. It works for me. I hope the fuck it works for you. And that was that. Now, if you want to put salt on the wound, that's the poster. The Frenchman is facing you, if you look at the poster, with his hands up, and Gene is shooting him in the back, and Billy signs that poster with love. Billy sent me the poster. Those are some of the things that happened in the French in the making of the French Connection. The French Connection, by the way, would be the first R-rated movie to win the Academy Award. Did people who made R-rated movies, did they win an Academy Award for acting? Did they win an Academy Award for filming, writing? But the picture never won. The first picture, R-rated picture, to win the Academy Award is The French Connection. And of course, it would go on to win for Phil D'Antoni, the producer, Billy Friedkin, the director, Gene Hackman, and it won, out of the 7 awards that it was nominated for, it won 5 awards. That picture today is 52 years old. That picture still plays today. And it, as they say, it stands up. When the picture was first released, it went against Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry. So in the first 2 or 3 weeks, Dirty Harry, wiped away every other movie that was against the French Connection. But as they say, the French Connection got legs. And it turned out to be the number one movie. The number one movie. I have met policemen today in 2023. I have met policemen 10 years ago, in 1016, 1012, and they said the reason that they became cops was because of the French Connection movie. I've heard that time and time again. I truly have. That movie opened up for me a whole new career. And so I'm speaking to you now as part of that new career. I'm speaking to you now, and I will make podcasts about those movies, and it's titled Billy and Me, The French Connection. I worked on The Exorcist, Brinks, Sorcerer, To Live and Die in L.A. I did Sorcerer. I went to France with Billy on Sorcerer. I wound up in Puerto Rico. We finished the film in Santo Domingo, out in the jungle. It was one of the toughest pictures to ever be made. I will be talking about all of those pictures that I did with Billy. And once again, it's all going to be under the guise of Billy and I. We have lost Billy Friedkin. I truly have lost a friend, a friend that I spoke to every 2 weeks. We raised our children together. There are so many stories that I will be telling about Billy Friedkin. That's personal to me. Now, there is a story that I'm going to continue to use it in other pictures. It doesn't belong in those pictures. The story that I'm going to tell you right now belongs in The Sorcerer. It belongs in The Sorcerer. But when Billy Friedkin was making The French Connection, doing The French Connection, Billy Friedkin always ate in the same restaurant. It was breakfast, always. When I was out in California with Billy, we would eat the bagels always in the same restaurant. And it was always the same waiter. I'm telling you, for 15 years, it was the same waiter. And the waiter's name was Nat Glick. And he once said to Billy over the years, "Are you going to put me in a movie? I want to be in a movie," and so forth and so on. So finally, by the time we get to make the movie, The Sorcerer, there is a line of when I say to Roy Scheider, and we will go into this in great detail, we will go into this where I say to Roy Scheider, when Roy Scheider is on the run, I say to Roy Scheider, "Look, catch a train down to Baltimore, see a guy by the name of Nat Glick, and Nat Glick will take care of it." And Roy would say to me, "Where am I going?" Nat Glick knows. That's how Nat Glick knows. Now, whenever we got into trouble, and we got into trouble in France, I'll explain that. We got into trouble of making the of making cruising, of where we used the real morgue and stuff like that. Whenever we got into trouble, Billy would drop me a note, or I would drop a note to Billy and say, "Billy, do I have to take that train down to Baltimore and see Nat Glick?" And he would say no. I have all those letters. I've given them to Billy. So that's how Nat Glick became into the movies and was used practically in every picture, especially when there was trouble. We would use Nat Glick's names. Now, my producer, Steve Brienza, we are looking for sponsors for these podcasts that are going on. And most importantly, we're looking for a publishing company that wants to take a chance on us to write this book. And of course, the book will not only include the movie work, but it'll include the work that I was doing on chasing cop killers. There's so many stories about that. I didn't do this alone, but yes. So we are looking for a publishing company. And if there happens to be a writer out there who has a publishing company, please call Steve Brienza. Looking forward to the next episode.
I just had one question. You mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
And he wants to know, in your big scene in The French Connection, the car is totally dismantled to find the heroin, put back together without a scratch. Is this basically Hollywood magic, or could the NYPD really?
No, good question. This truly is Hollywood magic. Nobody could tear a car apart like that and then get it back, then put it back together again. But yes, initially the car, the drugs were found in the car initially, and once again, Sonny Grasso figured that out. And the guy in the movie that's taking the car apart is the real guy who found the drugs on the real case. Also in that scene was my first appearance, which put me into Screen Actors Guild. And I was put in the office, and Billy says, "These people will be coming in, delay them." And I said, "Well, what?" And he said, Don't tell me, you'll know how to delay them." So there was one rehearsal where they call me Phil. I'm in the garage, they call me Phil. Roy comes in and says, "Hey, Phil," and then we cut. I wasn't even to say my lines on the rehearsal. So I looked up and I saw there was a sign in there for no smoking. So I asked the AD to ask the people, the French people that were going to come in, please have them light up cigarettes. And he said, okay. So when they came in and they were talking about the car and this and that and everything else, I said to them, "Please, sir, extinguish your cigarettes. You're in a no smoking area." According to Billy, that got the biggest laugh in the movie. I made up those lines. Billy had a habit of doing that. I made up those lines. Not only that, when Roy walks in, for the film, not the rehearsal, he didn't call me Phil. Look at the picture. He calls me Randy. "Hey, Randy, we got that for you." So those are the surprises that Billy Friedkin would do.
Main question,
that was a very good question.
Thanks. That was Bradley Richmond who asked that. I don't know if the name sounds familiar to you.
No.
But Mike DePalma.
Yeah, I know Mike.
Randy, explain to the audience how they started using your real name in the movies. So I think you just touched on that one.
Yeah, we just did.
And
there will come a time of all of these questions. It could be in the next podcast, before I do the
And
next podcast, I will do the French Connection, and I will answer all of these
Interesting
questions.
question. Naco Nolan. Randy, was the same Jimmy Aricchio the same cop who was in Maniac and Vigilante with you, the same cop who got jammed up by Bill Phillips?
Jimmy Aricchio was my lifelong friend. He was my brother. Yes, he was the same cop that was in all of those. Yes, Jimmy Riccio was dragged into the Bill Phillips because they worked in the same precinct. There were never any charges or anything ever brought against Jimmy Riccio. He retired with his pension.